Hi, everyone. Welcome to Alpha's very first webinar. My name is Allie Kerr. I'm the head of community with Alpha. I help put on our 65 events that we host nationwide. I really want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are hosting our first virtual event, which is really exciting. For those of you who are joining Alpha for the first time, Alpha is a private invite-only networking community for founders, CEOs, executives, and leading technology thought leaders. Alpha began in the Bay Area in 2005 and was founded by Eric Chin of Crossing Capital and Mike Jung of Founder Circle Capital. It has now grown to 2,000 members, and we host events across North America, including the Bay Area, Seattle, Los Angeles, Toronto, Chicago, Boston, and New York. We host about 65 events per year, including roundtable dinners, cocktail parties, and summits. Of course, at this time, we are not able to meet in person, so we're really excited to be able to connect with our community in a new way over a virtual platform. So before we get started, I would like to highlight our wonderful sponsors, Silicon Valley Bank, Warwick, and Amazon Web Services. Without you, none of this would be possible, so we really appreciate your support. And thank you to those from our sponsor partners who are able to join us today. I see a few of you on, so thanks for being here. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to our today's speaker, Dr. Emily Anhalt. She's the co-founder and chief clinical officer of COA. COA is a mental fitness community offering therapy, classes, and community for proactive mental and emotional health. They are opening brick and mortar studios across the country starting this fall. And we are lucky to be joined by Emily to answer your questions on emotional well-being as a leader, as a founder, as a partner, your relationships, your team, your company, and any questions you have during this time of uncertainty with the COVID-19 crisis. Thank you all for submitting your questions ahead of time, so Emily was able to answer as many questions as possible. And we will open up the chat at the end of the AMA, so you can chat live with Emily and ask any questions that come up during the presentation. So please stick around to the end. And thank you all for being here. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you all so much for having me and for showing up and for sending all of your questions. I'm just going to dive right in because I want to get to as many of them as I can. So a quick note about who I am. So I'm a clinical psychologist and an emotional fitness consultant. I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I've always had an interest in the psychology of the entrepreneur. I spent the last 10 years working clinically with founders, investors, and entrepreneurs. I've had the honor of working with leaders from companies like Google, GitHub, Harrison Metal, Asana, Bloomberg, around all kinds of amazing organizations. And in addition to all of that work, I am also, as stated, the co-founder and chief clinical officer of COA, which is a mental fitness studio. We're trying to make tending to your mental health in a proactive and ongoing way as possible and easy to access and visible as working on your physical health. So all of the questions you all sent are amazing. Thank you for sending those in advance. When I looked at them, they kind of grouped into these categories. And so I tried to push them together enough that I could speak to many at once. So the categories are about emotional fitness overall, lots of anxiety floating around. You're all definitely not alone there. How to self-care during this time, how to be a good leader during this crisis, what it means to transition to remote work and life for yourself and your team, and then the social and future implications for mental health of all of this. So let's just dive right in. So the first question I got is, what is emotional fitness and how do you measure it objectively? This is a super fair question. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how we came to this term emotional fitness. This is based on research that I did. I wanted to understand what it actually looks like when someone is proactively mentally healthy. How would you know if the leader you were sitting across the table from had good emotional fitness? So what I did was I interviewed 100 psychologists and entrepreneurs about what makes someone emotionally healthy. And I took all of their answers and my own 10 years of experience, and I did what's called an interpretive phenomenological analysis, which is a fancy way of saying that I transcribed all the interviews and I coded them for themes. And when I looked at the themes, they all came together around these 7 traits that emotionally fit leaders tend to display. And so here are the 7 traits quickly: self-awareness, empathy, playfulness, curiosity, mindfulness, resilience, and communication. Now, someone asked, how do you objectively measure emotional fitness? And I think I want to just throw out there that there's some aspects that you can measure, but the truth is psychology is as much an art as it is a science, just as relationships are as much an art as they are a science. But when it comes to emotional fitness, the most important thing is that everyone at a company is going to take its cues from above. So the more emotionally fit a leader is, the more emotionally fit the culture will be, the employees will be, the product will be, and thus the users will be. So as a leader, you really have to model the behavior you want to see. Someone asked, what's the best way to improve negative behaviors around mental fitness? And the most important thing really is you got to check yourself first. I think it's very common and very human that the things that we're frustrated about in the people around us are the things we really need to work on ourselves. And if you want anything in your company to change, you're going to have to figure out how to work on it yourself first. But when you are communicating with other people in your company, I recommend being as transparent as you possibly can, making sure that you have empathy and curiosity, ask a lot of questions, and have conviction that there's more to the story than you know. So when people are doing something frustrating or overwhelming or whatever it might be, I promise you there's more to that story. And by being curious, you might understand it and thus be able to help a little more. So let's dive into everything that's happening right now. Someone asked, is it normal to feel like my nervous system is in overdrive despite the fact that I'm working from my couch all day? Yeah, so the short answer is yes, definitely. We are all in fight or flight mode right now. There's no playbook for this. We're all figuring this out as we go. We're kind of making it up as we go. There really isn't any, protocol for a global pandemic and how to run a company while that's happening. There's a famous psychology quote, which is, humans can handle a lot, humans can handle chaos, but humans can't handle uncertainty. And I think actually that is what is most difficult right now, is dealing with all of the uncertainty. We don't know how long this will last. We don't know how badly we'll be affected by it. We don't know what the world is going to look like on the other side. And that uncertainty is so uncomfortable right now that we all are just, I think, having trouble functioning in a normal way. And it's important to give yourself compassion about this. The other thing is, I think this situation is putting people in very close touch with the injustices of the world. This is further marginalizing people who are already marginalized. And this is especially and disproportionately hard on certain groups of people. And it's really hard to deny that right now. Emotions are also really contagious. So we're all being very affected by the emotions we're seeing on social media, all of the panic happening on Twitter, everything floating around, that is coming into our psyche. And so, we're empathetic creatures. We're feeling the weight of all of that. So yes, it's very normal that that's where you're at right now. And it's undoubtedly affecting your work and the work of everyone on your team. So with all that said, how do I keep myself from going insane when everything is falling apart? Or in other words, can you share some tips for managing anxiety? So yes, I wanted to go through some tips for how you can handle your anxiety during this time. The first one is physical but not emotional social distancing. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of this. Yes, we all have to be in our homes, but that means it's extra important that we're connecting with our friends and our family, with each other, that we're going a little extra distance to be thoughtful and kind, and taking a little extra time at the beginning of meetings to get connected before diving in, things like that. Another thing I recommend is, and this is a tough balance, but prepare for the future with action, but stay present with emotion. And by that, I mean, we're all having to do a lot of planning right now, right? What are we going to do about the event that's planned for 3 months from now? And how are we going to deal with our runway running out because we're not taking in any revenue? These are things we have to plan for with our action. But what I see a lot of people do is try to figure out how they're going to deal with the emotional side of things that haven't happened yet. So I want to share some of the best advice I've ever gotten in my life. Years ago, I was dealing with a very scary situation. A family member of mine was in the hospital. It wasn't clear if they were going to make it, and I was really worried about what I would do if they passed away. And a family friend who is an oncologist and psychologist, so he deals with a lot of death and a lot of uncertainty and all of that, he came over, and I was saying to him, I don't know what I'm going to do if this person dies. How will I handle it? How will I survive? And he said, Emily, the version of you that will deal with that situation if it happens will be born into existence in that moment. And that version of you will have more time and more experience and more resources to deal with that situation than you have right now, because it hasn't actually happened. So the idea of this is, don't suffer future pain, trying to understand how you're going to deal with something emotionally that's down the line, it's almost unfair to ask of yourself because you're not up to yet to deal with that. You have to trust that your future self will handle that in that moment. And what's more, you have enough on your plate to deal with right now. So instead, just focus on dealing with what's true right now. So when you find yourself spinning with anxiety, I recommend bring yourself back to the present. What's true right now? What do I need to work through right in this moment? And just focus on that. All right, the next thing is bump up your self-care and healthy habits. I know that a lot of our instinct during times like this is to eat whatever we want and let our exercise routine go and not worry about sleep. Many of us are working major overtime right now to fill in the gaps, but actually it's just not sustainable. And as it's looking like this crisis is going to last a decent amount of time, you really are going to have to prioritize getting back into some of the healthy habits that keep gas in your car to keep moving forward. So make sure that you build in the things that make you feel good. For me, it's sleep. I need 8 hours of sleep. For some people, it's exercise. For some people, it's a healthy diet. Whatever it is for you, prioritize that. Next, feel your feels. Acknowledge them, have compassion for them. I know this might sound a little trite, but honestly, when we don't allow ourselves to lean into the things that we're feeling, they build up and they result in action that we might not have wanted to take. So what does it look like to actually give yourself a chance to acknowledge that this is really hard and overwhelming? As a leader, you are holding the emotions and fear of many people and the uncertainty of your company and the future. It's a lot. And so just kind of having compassion for that and giving yourself some time to slow down at points will prevent a lot of issues later. One thing I've seen be really useful if anxiety is really taking over and it's getting in the way a lot is schedule time to worry. So anxiety is a useful thing for humanity. We need it. It makes us feel like we're prepared for what's going to happen. We are rolling these things over in our mind to figure out what we're going to do about them. That makes sense. It's not possible to eliminate that completely. But if you're worrying all day long and it's preventing you from getting anything done, that's not useful to you. So it can be useful to literally schedule time into your calendar to worry. And during that time, you can be as scared and as worried as you want. You can run through all of the worst case scenarios. You can feel whatever you're feeling about it. But the rest of the day, when you start to feel anxious, you literally kick it down the road. You're like, my worry hour is 4 p.m. I will worry about this then. For now, I'm just going to stay present with what's true right now. So hopefully some of these tips help. And if you have other tips, feel free to share them in the chat at the end. I'm sure people will benefit from what's been working for you. All right, how do I deal with extreme stress with a small group under quarantine together? So this is real. You might be at home alone, but you might be home with a partner or family or roommates, whatever it might be. So here are some tips for dealing with how to get through this with the people you're living with. So firstly, communicate early and often. Don't wait until small problems have become big problems to talk about them. You have to be really clear about what you need, ideally before you need it. So if you're a person who needs alone time in the beginning of the day, then let the people you live with know that before you feel like you're absolutely sick of them. If what you need is uninterrupted work time at certain points, then maybe you need to figure out what rooms are going to allow for that, schedule, all of that. And then one thing that I find really useful is when there's conflict between you and another person, try to slow down and shift your thinking from me versus you to us versus the problem. This is really useful. Let's say you and your partner are arguing over who gets to use the office for a work call, and it really feels like you have what you need, they have what they need, and it's death match to figure out who's going to get it. See if you can slow down and get on the same team and say, instead of who of us is going to win this argument, it's how are we going to join forces to tackle this space problem? How are we going to work together to figure this out? And just this reframe will change the way that it feels to work these kinds of things out. And you'll most likely get to a solution a lot more quickly because you'll be able to empathize with each other and put your minds together. Okay. Is checking social media and the news all the time helping or hurting? Man, all right, I totally understand the urge to be checking all of the time. We are simultaneously more isolated and more connected than we've ever been in our lives. And when people feel out of control, which I think most of us do in one way or another right now, those of us who are intellectualizers, which I would imagine are the majority of people in this room right now, we try to regain control through knowledge. So the idea is, okay, I feel really out of control, but maybe if I know more, I'll be able to control more, I'll be able to fix things, I'll be able to prepare for things. And this is true to a point. yes, we do need to know what the CDC is recommending, and we do need to know how bad the situation is and what people are doing about it. But there comes a point where that goes from being helpful to just really getting in your way. So when checking the news on social media is causing you more anxiety instead of less anxiety, that means that it's time to take a break. It is okay to delete Twitter off your phone. There is not that much new information coming out in any given moment that you really need to be checking it every second. The truth is, we're pretty addicted to our devices. We were addicted to our devices before all of this. Now, most of our screen time has probably gone up, I don't know, like 200%, something crazy. And this is because any addictive behavior gets worse under stress. So just like someone who is addicted to a substance, when things are tough in their life, it's harder for them not to use that substance. So too are we going to have a harder time not to use our devices right now. But there comes a point where this is really going to get in the way of us just functionally living our lives. So maybe you just take a harm reduction approach and you put a little space between yourself and social media. Maybe you put your phone in another room 1 hour a day and you're just not allowed to check it for that 1 hour. Or maybe you set the controls on your phone to not let yourself use apps after a certain amount of time. You might have to literally interfere, because I know for me, I will tell myself I'm not going to use my phone, and then 10 seconds later my phone is in my hand and I won't even remember having picked it up. So you might have to put in a little extra effort to mitigate this pattern. All right, how do I stay sane while sheltering in place? I can't emphasize enough how important self-care is right now. Think about, when is the last time you went outside or opened a window even? I went 2 days straight the other day without literally even opening it out, and barely realized it because I was working so much. This is not good for you. You have to schedule this in. Another thing that's really bad for mental health is loneliness. I'd say even the sturdiest of introverts at some point are going to really feel that they are isolated from their friends and family and coworkers. So make sure you're scheduling time with your friends and family online. And you can get creative here. I've seen some cool ideas, like one team would take turns pretending like they're on MTV Cribs and showing each other around their house and, showing each other the fun features of their house. I've seen jam band sessions. I've seen online game days, virtual dance parties. I've seen people set up their kids online to talk virtually with their friends. I've seen one thing where a group of friends took turns just celebrating each other and sharing love with each other. And I heard of one family who would draw a family member out of a hat, and then they would sit around and each draw each other. So by the end, there were portraits of each of them. My co-founder, Alexa, had an amazing idea, which I've taken up, which is you and everyone in the house can write down a bunch of activities that you can do from home and put them in a bowl. And when you have time or space or need an idea of something to do, you pull an activity out of the bowl. So I've been doing this, and there have been all kinds of fun things coming out of it, like bake a cake or watch a movie that you haven't seen in 10 years, or take apart an old device and see what's inside, all kinds of things. You can put whatever feels good for you. And then overall, just lean into your feelings as a challenge for self-awareness. The things that already were hard for you in life are probably extra hard for you now. So if you are a person who worries about money, that's probably where your anxiety lives right now. If you're a person who worries about, the future or your health or uncertainty, these things are really amplified right now. So take a second to assess what's coming up for you and make some space to have compassion for it. All right, let's move into some leadership stuff. So what are tips for talking to investors about how they can best support during this time? So as a founder myself, I know it's complicated to admit to your investors when you need support. I think all of us worry that we need to appear really strong and like we have everything together, or who knows what will happen in the next round, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, I've been exploring this as much as I can with investors, and the sense that I get is that they genuinely would strongly prefer proactive transparency over waiting until things hit the fan and then you're coming to them with the house on fire, right? So I have been really inspired and surprised by how open our investors have been to talking to us about what we need and how to get it. So ideally, before you really need the thing, go to your investor and say, hey, I see this coming around the corner. I think we're going to need extra support. Can you set me up with X, Y, or Z resource to help my team or myself? Be transparent. And, ultimately, the things that you try to handle yourself that are too much for you will come back to bite you in the butt later. So ask for help when you can. One thing I've seen is there are a lot of investors that will even subsidize the cost of resources right now. One of our investors pays for co-founder therapy for us for, I think, 2 months, something like that. It was really helpful. So don't be afraid to ask. The worst that can happen is they say no. All right, the next question I got, how do I keep from letting my team know that I'm freaking the F out? All right, I get this. I know that we are wanting to have a brave face and make sure people have confidence and don't leave the company and don't totally lose it. But it's really important that you get the support you need so that your company is not the catch-all for your unprocessed emotions, which is what happens to us when we don't have our own support structure. So something I say a lot is that a tech leader is a lot like a parent, in the sense that I'm sure you all know that in one way or another, the things that parents don't work through from their own, self and past get passed down onto the kids. And that's what happens in a company. The leaders who aren't dealing with their own stuff, they're going to leak that into the company and onto their employees. So make sure you have your own therapist, make sure you're meditating, yoga, journaling, whatever it is that helps you get centered, do that so that your company is not feeling the weight of it. And then how do you balance optimism with acknowledging the reality of the situation? So essentially, you're going to have to find the balance between transparency and boundaries. And this is kind of a hard balance to find. So imagine, let's say your company is in really dire straits. You're not sure if you're going to make it through this crisis or not, and you're really worried about it. And someone in your company, asks you in a meeting, hey boss, how are we doing? Are we going to be okay through this? Now, hopefully you're not like, it's all going to hell. We're all going to be homeless. Might as well shut things down right now, right? Like that's going to freak people out. They're not going to know what to do that. People want to know that there's someone steering the ship, okay? But on the other hand, you also shouldn't say, everything's fine. I don't know what you're talking about. We're good. No problem here. Because people are perceptive. And when what you say doesn't match what they feel or what they can see you're feeling, it's really unsettling. And it leads to people losing some faith in you as a leader. So the idea is, how can you find somewhere in the middle where you're conveying to them, look, there's a lot of unknown here. I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure what's going to happen to all of us, but here's my game plan for what we're going to do to get through the next week or month or quarter, whatever it is. And then we're going to reassess together again. Make sure people know that you're all in this together and that you're doing your best to hold everyone. The other thing I suggest is take a no bad ideas in a brainstorm kind of approach. Enlist the people on your team to figure out how you're going to deal with worst case scenarios. But again, remember that plan for the future with action, stay present with emotion thing. This is something you should model with your team. How can you think about the future and how you're going to deal with tough situations in terms of your planning? But can you bring people back to the present emotionally in terms of what's true right now? And then lastly, give some permission to fail small on the way to succeeding big. And by that, I mean, you're probably going to have to try some things during this time that you wouldn't have had to try otherwise. And whenever that happens, sometimes things aren't going to go the way that you wanted them to. And so making sure the team knows that they have permission to throw some things at the wall and see if they stick during this time. I mean, their company's doing full pivots right now. And that's hard. When you pivot fully, you haven't had time to experiment or see how things are going to land. But some of those things might really work out. So how can you give your team the space and permission to experiment with you? All right. Productivity is starting to decrease. How can we keep our employees motivated to maintain urgency, or do we give them some grace during this time? So this is really fair. I get that you all are at the head of the company having to make sure things keep working, but this is not business as usual, and you can't expect it to be. People are really being affected by this. And actually, my experience is that a lot of people aren't even fully aware of how much they're being affected by this, and that it's actually quite deeply undercutting their ability to focus, to do what they need to do. And if you can't recognize that, then what happens is they're just going to try to hide it from you. And as a leader, that's not really what you want. So I recommend figure out how much commitment you need to keep the ship afloat, and then be as graceful as you can about the rest. One of the companies that I work with decided that they expect employees to be online half time. All right, so we need you to be online and available 20 hours a week instead of 40. and be as present as you can during those 20 hours a week. And we understand that the other 20, you're going to have to take care of your kids, and you're going to have to make meals that we used to provide for you, and take time to breathe and walk outside and all of those things. So have the grace that you can. Check in often about how people are doing and what they need. So one suggestion is you can create a COVID Slack channel on Slack where people are allowed to voice any worries they have and ask any questions they have. And once a day or once a week, whatever is realistic, go in there and answer the questions you have. And you don't have to have perfect question or perfect answers. You can say, hey, all, this is a really good question. I wish I had the answer to this. This is something only time will tell, but I feel what you're feeling in this moment. I know it's overwhelming, and I'm here with you, and we're going to keep you updated. Maintain special things virtually where possible. Sometimes the lighter, kinder things are the first to drop when we're overwhelmed. So birthday celebrations and games and the lighthearted parts of working together, don't let those things drop. Find a way to make them happen virtually. One company I worked with had everyone prepare or get their treat, and they all ate them together to celebrate the birthdays for that month, that kind of thing. So don't let that be the first thing to go. And then as a leader, it's really important you model self-care to give permission for other people to have self-care. I promise you, if it looks like you are working 60, 80, 100 hours a week, it's going to be really hard for your team to feel like they have permission to take a break and breathe. And I can tell you from experience that you want them to rest and take care of themselves. They will burn out. And when people burn out, it's usually in a pile of fiery flames. And that's not what you want for your company. Play the long game here. Make sure things are sustainable. Make sure you're giving people permission by showing them that it's okay to take care of yourself. All right. Some of our employees have talked about their struggles with adjusting to the work from home life. Any tips for supporting them? So this is hard. Not everyone is built to work from home. Okay, I know that there is a subset of people who are as relieved as they've ever been that they finally get to work remote, and that's awesome. You might let those people lean into that and share tips for what works for them. But not everyone's like that. Some people are true extroverts. Some people really rely on the energy of everyone around them to give them energy. And so this is a big adjustment. And I think it's important to acknowledge the change and accept that there's going to be an adjustment period. And you might voice that. Say, listen, I know working from home is new to a lot of you and not ideal for some of you. This is going to take a little while. We're going to have to try some things. Let's stay communicative about what's working and what's not working. One thing you might think about doing is sending a leadership schedule. So what this looks like is take time yourself as a leader to write out what your work from home schedule looks like. What time are you waking up? What are you doing first thing in the morning? Are you meditating? Are you making sure to eat breakfast? Whatever it might be. Are you showing that your calendar is blocked off for those hours so people can't schedule a meeting that interrupts that self-care time? And then once you're in work, how much of that time are you totally available and on Slack and answering messages and in meetings? And how much are you heads down with headphones, not being interrupted, doing what you have to do? And then after work, what does it look like to really sign off and give yourself that space? Are you scheduling in meals? Are you scheduling in exercise? You can show people what it looks like to become a little more structured during this time. What you also might do is share tips about what's working for you. So for example, for me to be productive from home, I have to set up my space in a really particular way. I need to have noise in the background personally. I need to not be hungry, so I have to have a snack nearby. I need to have all of my devices set up just right. I kind of create like a work nest for myself before even diving in. And just sharing that with some people has been helpful because they've not had to do that before. And so it didn't occur to them that they should maybe make sure they have everything they need before they get started so that they don't have to interrupt their thought flow halfway through to get themselves water, to get themselves the pen they like to write with, or whatever it might be. So be transparent about what you do for yourself. And that might mean you have to do this research first for yourself. What do you need in order to do this work well? Next, make sure people are taking breaks and going outside. I've seen companies say, hey, we have a company-wide pause. Unless you're in the middle of something you really can't stop, I want everyone to just go outside for 10 minutes, breathe some fresh air, and then let's come back together and just talk about how that felt and what you saw and what it was like out there. So encouraging people to take breaks. One thing you're going to see a lot is there are people who are going to channel all of their anxiety into their work. It's a common thing, but actually don't let people do this to their detriment. don't let people work so hard to deal with their anxiety that they end up totally burning themselves out or making the anxiety a lot worse. You have to encourage people to slow down and take some space for themselves. And then next, as a leader, it's really important that you're respecting people's boundaries and that you're showing that that's something everyone should be doing. So getting online and offline at certain times. I know as a CEO, it's not always possible to have normal work hours, but you can't expect everyone to work through the night. It's just not going to work. So making sure that you tell people, listen, tell us what your boundaries are in order for you to do your best work, and we're all going to do our best to respect those boundaries. Because there's no physical separation of spaces like there used to be, homework or my desk, meeting room, common area, whatever, you have to create theoretical boundaries of space. And so one thing you might do is designating different rooms in your house for different things so that you start to associate being in the living room with work and being in the bedroom with rest and not bringing your work into your bedroom, things like that. So start to create theoretical separations to replace the physical ones that usually exist. Okay, what are some ways we can make our employees feel connected during this time? This is so important. It's so easy to feel disconnected right now. And I would say my number one suggestion for this is that play is more important than ever. And when I talk about play, I usually am thinking about it in the improv definition sense of play, which is that when someone comes to you with an idea, you don't say yes, but, and you don't even just say yes. You say yes, and. You meet them at their idea, you expand on that idea, and together you get somewhere together that you couldn't have gotten to individually or alone. So brainstorming is a type of play. Or if you've ever taken a joke way too far with a friend, then that's a kind of play. It's letting things continue and knowing that the journey itself is the pursuit. So there are all kinds of ways that you can integrate play into your remote work life. One of the things is sometimes you're going to need some warm-up time on remote meetings. Not everyone drops into remote meetings the same way they would if you were gathering in a room. So it's a really nice thing to start your meetings with an icebreaker game. And one resource I can provide is we at COA put together a big packet of games, most of which work really well virtually. So if you need ideas of time-boxed games that you can play at the beginning of a remote meeting, reach out to us. I'll give my information at the end and we'll send that, because what is nice about this is because people want that warm-up time, it can end up sort of leaking through the whole meeting, right? If you're just letting people kind of chit chat and talk and process, and then at some point you're like, oh, we should probably get into this meeting. By playing a game, when the game's over, then great, now everyone's kind of connected with each other and feeling a little more open and a little more able to think, and then you can get right into the meeting, and it's a way to sort of contain that. So happy to help you with some game ideas there. Another thing that you might do is start a work from home games channel. There's all kinds of really creative, amazing things floating around out there that people can do from their home to be playful together. I just saw a pandemic toolbox doc that's open to everyone, and there's literally thousands of entries of ideas of fun and creative things that you can do from home. So encourage people to be sharing ideas there. And then one thing I saw that I thought was really nice is one company sent everyone in the company snack boxes. There's a service that you can get, I'll have to find it and I can send it out to anyone interested, where just like an Amazon box full of healthy snacks shows up on their doorstep. And it's just a way to show that you're thinking of everyone and that you're caring about them and that you know that they maybe need a little boost of joy in their day. And so it's a small investment to make to show people that they're on your mind. And then another thing I've seen that's really funny is there's a Snapchat filter plugin that you can get for Zoom that lets you do the craziest things you can imagine with Zoom. You can turn yourself into all kinds of things like dancing avocado and a chicken nugget, and you can put yourself in a Bob Ross painting, and it's just a fun way to be silly at the beginning of meetings. I recommend modeling that you can play around with it for 5 minutes and then you shut it off and get into your actual meeting. So bump up the play, really invest in this, check in on employees often, reach out to them individually if that's possible with the size of your company, or reach out to teams, make sure people know that they can come to you if they need extra support. All right, how to balance taking care of the business and team while being socially responsible in our community. So this is so important and so tough. I love this question. And the answer to it is going to depend on your capacity. you have to have enough energy and resources to keep going. It is an airplane situation. You have to put your own mask on before you can put on the mask of others. If you are barely hanging on yourself, it's probably not the right time to devote all of your resources to the greater social good. But if you do have any energy and resources to spare, I highly recommend paying it forward. This is a time that people need us more than ever. There are some companies that just frankly aren't going to make it through this, which is really painful. And again, those marginalized groups of people are really being dropped and forgotten by the entities that are supposed to be looking out for them. So whatever you can do is important. And then logistically, I promise it comes back around. Like I just recently saw an article about, I think Mark Cuban wrote it, about how the way companies handle this crisis right now are going to define how that company is thought of for decades. So the way that you use your platform and your privilege to help others right now is hugely going to affect the way people think about you from here. So how can you use your resources to help others? At COA, what we've done is we're offering all of our workshops and discussions for free online right now for the community for as long as we can do that, because people need it. And the truth is, it's been great for us. We have hundreds of people who've signed up for our newsletter because of this service and who now know what it feels like to engage in this kind of process and who are now more excited about doing it as a result. So think about how you can give back and know that it'll find its way back to you. All right, and then finally, what will the longer term effects of quarantine and social distancing be on individuals, community, and culture? So this is not totally possible to know. This is me showing you what it looks like just to sit in the uncertainty. I don't know all the answers to this, and that's scary. If we knew what all of the long-term consequences were going to be, we could plan for them, but we don't. And so we have to bring ourselves back to what's true right now. I can share that I see a lot of companies and individuals seeing all of this and the response to this as proof that the future is virtual. As a clinician, I just don't think that's true. We're such social creatures. We need each other. And I think when all of this is over, we're going to need connection and experience more than we ever have before. I do think there's going to be a very real recovery period. There's going to be a lot of grieving that we have to do as a community for all that's been lost. And people are going to have to create routines. They're going to have to readjust. They're going to have to create new structure for their lives. I read something a while ago about the idea that as painful as these situations are, what they also do is, you can think about it like fresh snow. A crisis like this blankets fresh snow across our lives, and we have the opportunity to create new tracks. So we may have been stuck in a certain track a lot before, and it was really hard to go outside of it. And now there's this fresh snow, and we can decide, what do we want our self-care routine to be, and what do we want our work from home policy to be, and how do we want to stay connected to people in our lives, things like that. And so there's an opportunity here. And I don't mean to Pollyanna all of you with this, because I do think there's a lot of importance in leaning into the negative stuff, but there's also a lot of space for beauty here. There's a lot of really magical and profound things that I've seen coming out of humanity in all of this. I think when we're faced with really terrible times, people come together, and we see the worst of people, but I think we also really see the best of people. So hold on to some of that optimism alongside all of the feelings you might be feeling. And don't forget to reach out for support. Come together. I'm going to tell you a little bit about next steps in terms of if you want to continue your support, and then I'm going to open up the chat for questions in case anyone has any. So COA is really here to continue to serve people through all of the many feelings that you might be having. So we'd love for you to help build the mental fitness revolution with us. Head over to joincoa.com. You can see all of the free classes and workshops that we're offering right now. We're specifically doing one for founders coming up. So if that's interesting to you, everything we do is led by licensed therapists. So our thesis is, listen, if you're going to do work on yourself, do it with someone who's spent the last decade to 3 decades of their life working to understand the human condition, who can really help you get in there. Our therapists have experience working with people in tech, founders, leaders, all of that. And sign up for our newsletter to stay updated on our launch and to just stay in touch. We want to hear what your needs are so that we can help serve those needs. So thank you all so much for tuning into this. I wanted to save time for questions that I didn't have a chance to get into or that you want me to go deeper into. I'll throw out there that I have to be careful about answering super clinical questions. So for example, I can't say how to handle a panic attack you're having right now. I want you to go to your own therapist for that and get the support you need. But what can I talk about that hasn't already been touched on that's on people's minds? I think we'll need to have Allie or Emily open up the chat and I'll see what pops up. So I'll give you just a minute to do that. Let's see. Okay, chat is now open. So what's on people's minds? What are you worried about? What are you seeing? In addition to questions you have, I would also love for people to chat out some things that have been working for you, some tips that you might have for each other. This is a really strong, solid community. And so if you have the ability to share from your own wisdom and expertise, I'm sure people would really appreciate that. In all of the offerings we've been doing, we've actually seen that the most useful ones have been the discussion-based offerings where people are learning from each other, because we're pretty good as humans at convincing ourselves that we're alone when we're not really alone. I think we're sharing a lot of the same pain and struggle and process and all of that. Oh, I love this. Okay, so someone gave the suggestion to have check-ins before a meeting, scale of 1 to 10, how you're doing. This is a really powerful thing. It takes the temperature of the room. It helps get a sense of where people are at and if someone would need extra support. A reminder that knowing how someone is doing doesn't mean it's your job to fix all of it. I think sometimes we worry about checking in with people who are struggling because we're like, oh, well, now your problem is my problem, and I already have enough of my own problems. That's actually not the case. Empathy just means letting yourself feel what someone else is feeling for a moment so that you can really join them in it. So take the time to check in with people before meetings. I think that's a great one. What else has been working for people, and what other questions do you have that I might touch on? Otherwise, we can wrap things up in a bit, and then if you have questions you want to ask privately, I can make myself available to chat with anyone who wants more information. Anything else on people's minds? Any other tips? I can definitely ask questions of, I'm curious what people's tips are for successfully working from home. Are you a person who already works from home and you're good at it? Or are you a person who's found ways to adjust really successfully? If you can share, what does your routine look like? Do you have really clear time box periods where you're not working, or do you still let yourself be available? What does that look like? That's one of the questions I get the most commonly, is how we can create structure in a work remote environment. Anyone? Okay, here we go. So, okay, now they're pouring in. All right, do you think it's okay to reassure employees that their jobs are safe when in actuality we don't know how long this crisis is going to last and the true effect will have on our economy and our business? My suggestion is, don't make promises that you can't keep, but give reassurance where you can. I don't think you have to promise employees that their jobs are safe. I think you can promise that you're doing everything that you can to preserve that. You can say, listen, our top priority is making sure that we all come out the other side of this together. And we're going to do everything we can to keep your job safe. I think you can say that, and that will instill confidence and optimism. But that way you're not promising anything, because we just don't know. And the truth is, you're right. We have no idea how long this crisis is going to last. And you don't want people to feel like you told them something that you didn't follow up on. So give them all of the reassurance and confidence that you can truthfully give, and then and then leave it at that and say, I wish that we could guarantee future, but we can't. But we're in it together. Someone suggested keeping a routine of waking up at the same time and wearing work clothes. I think that's awesome. It's more possible for some people than others. I know I personally work better when I'm in comfortable clothes, and so I've sort of given myself that permission. But if you work better when you're at a desk and you're in the right clothing and you have put on, makeup and you're feeling more in that mode, then great, please definitely keep doing that. Space out meetings, start them at 10 after the hour. So this is a great therapist trick. There's a reason why therapy is 50 minutes most of the time. It's because that 10 minutes between sessions gives you a chance to slow down and relax and breathe and get yourself ready for the next one. Having meetings back to back is really intense, actually. And I love the idea that you start them at 10 after the hour to give people a little bit of time to regroup. Has anyone had to deal with salary or payroll reductions, and how have you dealt with asking people to do more with less? This sounds like a question for the community, a little less my expertise, but definitely something to think about together. I'd suggest going for a commute. Start the day with a 20-minute walk and your favorite podcast before coming back to settle into your home office or work nest. I love this idea. I'm so behind on my podcasts because I usually only listen to them in transit. I think asking yourself to actually get outside and move your body, like when's the last time you really moved your body? That's super important. I think that's an awesome idea. I'm going to do that myself. And then Alexa says, my partner and I just named all of our meeting rooms in the house for a sense of play. We named them after different dog breeds. I love this. I've seen people create actual Google calendars, spreadsheets, schedules that outline what the different space in different parts of the house are used for. I think that's a great way to create a little bit of structure. So that's awesome. These are all awesome tips. I love this. Let me think. The other thing I'm curious about is what self-care structure you've put into place for yourself. Are you making sure to sleep right now? Have you called up your therapist to do a virtual session? Are you meditating more? Are there apps that have been helpful to you? What has your self-care routine looked like? I think this feels like a question that's asked so much that it can sometimes feel meaningless, but actually it's really important that you're spending as much time as you can investing in that. So I'm curious too what that looks like for people. How do you stay sane amidst the madness and all of this? So I'll throw that question out there.